Since 2007, Mental Health First Aid England have trained more than 1.1 million people across 20,000 workplaces to help build more inclusive, mentally healthy cultures. And while 90% of those trained believe that mental health first aid should be a legal requirement in every workplace, only 29% of organisations train their managers to support mental health. The cost of this gap is not only unsustainable, it's deeply concerning. The UK now loses nearly £212 billion every year due to economic inactivity. That's 7% of our GDP, or nearly 70% of all income tax revenue lost through reduced output, increased welfare payments, and additional pressure on the NHS. So where does mental health first aid fit in the preventative approach to workplace wellbeing? Should it be made mandatory? And what responsibilities do employers have when it comes to adjustments and early support before people reach crisis point?
There's an assumption that if you've got mental health first aiders and you've got a list of people on a wall, that everyone picks the phone up or does an email or knocks on a door and says, can I come and talk to you? A manager has more of an influence on your mental health than your doctor or your therapist, and equal to that of your partner. It's got to be about, this is saving lives and changing lives, and we cannot lose sight of that.
To answer these questions, I'm joined by Sarah McIntosh, Chief Executive of Mental Health First Aid England, an organisation that plays a central role in shaping how the UK approaches mental health skills, support and culture change in the workplace. Sarah McIntosh, good to see you. Thank you for joining the show. How are you doing?
I am good, thank you. How are you?
Yeah, good. Super excited and feeling super grateful. I mean, I'm sure you've got a number of things on at the moment. And really excited to get into this conversation as we talk about the answer to a number of questions, but one of which I'm really interested to get into is, should mental health first aid be mandatory in the workplace? Which, of course, the answer is yes, right?
I mean, absolutely. Yeah, of course it should be. It's a huge topic at the moment. Lots of people are talking about it. We've been talking about it for quite some time. It's interesting, isn't it, to think if you go back to sort of the 70s and 80s in workplaces, there were so many health and safety issues and accidents at work that people said, actually, employers need to play a role in preventing these accidents at work. And actually, people should have physical first aiders on site in case there's an accident so that you could really help somebody and preserve life and get them the right treatment as early as and quickly as possible. And here we are, decades later, and mental health is a huge issue in the workplace, and we're now having the same and similar conversations and a kind of parallel conversation around mental health and mental health first aid. So from my perspective, mental health first aid is as crucial as knowing how to do CPR. It can really help people. It can help them with early intervention. It can help them with access to treatment quickly, more successful recovery, and in many cases it can absolutely save lives. So why wouldn't you mandate it in every workplace?
Interesting you mentioned that, actually. Just it kind of puts things in perspective, right? That there was a time several decades ago that actually we had to kind of go through a similar process that we're kind of in at the moment in terms of mandating physical first aiders in the workplace. It's interesting, the parallels, but I guess before we get into that, I always like to understand a little bit more about the person that's sitting in front of me. So just thinking about your personal journey, your career, it's spanned, leadership roles that have been focused on people, well-being and organizational change. Thinking back to the beginning, what first motivated you personally to work in the field of mental health, and what or how has that shaped the leader that you've become today?
I think that's a really interesting question. I've been doing some reflection on this at the moment. If I go back to early in my life, mental health has always been a huge part of my childhood and growing up. So I lived at home with my mum, who has severe mental health issues. So I grew up as a carer, effectively. She was quite debilitated at times with that. So I'd kind of grown up with this being normal for someone to have mental ill health, and for it to be perhaps unusual when I went to school and spoke to some of my friends who didn't have to think about some of these things. So I've always lived with supporting someone with mental ill health. And then as I got into my late teenage years, I experienced mental ill health myself, and got to quite a dark place, actually. I needed quite a lot of support. So I think mental health's always been really, really important to me, and helping people to understand more about it, helping them to understand how to make the right support available at the right time for people to get what they need with mental ill health is really, really important to me. But I didn't necessarily start out life from a work perspective in mental health. So I guess my early life was very focused on just trying to improve things for people. Has probably been the core principle of every role I've ever had. So whether it's been about improving customer experience or improving employee experience, there's always been an element of, actually, how do you remove barriers for people? How do you improve things for people? How do you continue to improve and make people happy and thrive and get the most out of anything that they do? So they've been fundamental principles to everything that I've done. And I've been lucky enough to, every organisation I've worked for has been a not-for-profit social enterprise. So it's been an organisation that provides a service to somebody, but has also, generates profit for good and societal impact. And I think that's been crucial really to who I am and what I do. So it's probably no wonder that I ended up in the world of diversity, equity, inclusion, accessibility, and sort of HR issues predominantly, which led to me going on the mental health first aid course myself about probably 12 years ago. We'd heard about the course and we decided that quite a few of us from our own organisation would go. And actually, it was 2 days that absolutely changed my life, I think for two reasons. One is it really helps you to understand your own mental health. And I could see a lot of the things that had happened to me in the past. Actually, I learned a lot about that experience on reflection, with the kind of right language and the right information and knowledge. But also, secondly, I was able to use those skills immediately when I went home with a family member, which I'd been concerned about for a while. Mm-hmm. And it gave me, again, the right language to open up a conversation, quite a difficult conversation, but in a safe and confident way. And I was able to support a family member to get access to their GP and actually refer them into mental health services. And to this day, we talk about that now as that actually we think that saved their life. It was that life-changing for them as an individual. But I always think back, what happened if I hadn't have gone on that course? Like, how would I have opened that conversation? Would I ever have had that conversation? And where would we have been now?
Sure.
14 years later, if I hadn't have been able to open that conversation. So it changed my life. And when the role came up to work for Mental Health First Aid England, I was like, this is definitely what I want to do. This is such an impactful course. It's life-changing, it's life-saving, and I have to be part of it and part of its future.
I mean, yeah, a few things there. Powerful story, number one. Thank you for sharing. Number two, I mean, definitely something to be said there for, meaningful work, in terms of having a career in with organisations that are generating revenue for a good cause. And number three there, just in terms of the immediate impact for yourself, the immediate kind of takeaway for yourself with mental health first aid, what I pick up there is that actually the immediate benefit of the training was that it helped you reflect on some of your own circumstances, get a bit of clarity there, but then also then to think more practically about how you would apply it. But the first place wasn't the workplace, it was actually closer to home, which is quite interesting. And then just to, I guess, the follow-up off the back of all of that is, so growing up effectively as a carer for your mum, getting to a dark place with your own mental health along the way. Would you say that there was any kind of one moment that then kind of informs how you lead Mental Health First Aid England today throughout all of that?
I don't think there's one moment. I think life is a series of moments, isn't it? Good and bad. And I think they set your frame of reference for what you think good support, good leadership, good management should look like. I think I've worked in quite a few workplaces where organisations have been thriving and have, done amazing things to celebrate impact and motivate people and engage them really, really well. And I've learned a lot of things about what's right to do. But there have been organisations at times where they haven't quite got things right. And, you experience the poorer end of what leadership and management probably shouldn't look like. And I think with the lens of having a background of always wanting to improve people's experiences and make them thrive and make them feel as happy and fulfilled as possible. I've always spotted the kind of good and the bad throughout my career. And whenever I do something, I'm always continually thinking, what does that person need right now in the moment for this context? Or actually, what groups are going to struggle with this? What extra things do I need to think about? So I think there's something for me about always taking time to think about things from different people's point of view, different audiences' point of view. And that's, I think, what I've taken into the way that I lead and the way that I manage people, trying to really understand people, understand what works, what doesn't work, improve it, make it better, help them thrive. They're the key foundations for me.
A language of needs, you might say.
100%. But not just needs, but beyond needs. I think sometimes, people kind of know what they need, but they sometimes don't know what good looks like as well if they've not experienced it. So we're always trying to stretch that a little bit.
Yeah. Interesting. What is one misconception about Mental Health First Aid England that people often have?
Well, I think there's two actually. I think the first is mental health first aid has lots of similarities to physical first aid, but it has lots of differences as well. So physical first aid, you are taught some clinical skills in order to preserve life and to support people who've been injured. Mental health first aid is not clinical. It is not a course that teaches you clinical skills. It's not there to you're not there to diagnose somebody's condition. It teaches you how to have a brilliant, open and safe conversation with somebody about their mental health and to signpost them to the appropriate level of support so that they can get what they need when they need it.
Sure.
And I think the big misconception is people's assumption is that it's a clinical training course and therefore we should measure the clinical outcomes of it. It's actually a workplace-based training course about great conversations, supportive conversations and signposting. And I think people don't necessarily understand that unless they've been through it and have practiced mental health first aid themselves. I think the second thing is quite often mental health first aid has been so popular and it's grown hugely over the last few years. I think there's a misconception that mental health first aid is a private company with lots of shareholders making lots of money off training lots of people. And actually, we're a not-for-profit social enterprise. We've got a huge motivation to train 1 in 10 of the adult population in mental health knowledge and skills.
It's currently one in 35.
It's 1 in 32 today, actually.
Today.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, that's our mission. We're a social enterprise, not-for-profit. It's all about the impact for us. Yes, if we make a profit, we reinvest that profit into supporting people who otherwise wouldn't be able to access or afford the training, and that is our model. So quite often I think people see the reach that we have and the impact that we have and assume that actually this is a kind of private sector shareholder type business and forget that actually we're very charitable, we're a social enterprise. It's all about the impact for us and how we can reach as many people as possible with these skills because they are just brilliant. And wouldn't it be amazing if everybody could experience some of those knowledge and skills? The world would be a much better place.
Do you have a timescale in mind in terms of when we kind of bridge that gap between the 1 in 10 and 1 in 32?
If we carry on at the rate that we're going, it will
Sure.
probably take us about another 6 or 7 years to get to 1 in 10. Yeah, so it's not that far away,
No,
which
it's a
is
rate of knots.
brilliant. And I think for us, we're going to aim and hurtle towards that as quickly as we can. But there are other roles in workplaces that need different knowledge and skill sets as well to be able to support wider workplace mental health. So some of the things that we started to look at is kind of the key role of the manager in a workplace. What are the key roles of those who influence culture? So if you look at an organisation, everyone always looks to the manager or, the big boss of the organisation setting the tone. But the people that really, really provide support and really, really shape culture are quite often, chairs of employee networks, trade union reps, wellbeing champions, volunteers for different employee initiatives. There are lots and lots of people that have the opportunity to influence a person's experience of work, and I think they have slightly different needs around what that means for workplace mental health and support. So, we're starting to look at some of those roles in organisations and how we can support them so that there's much more of a whole organisation approach to workplace mental health rather than training individuals with mental health first aid. And a lot of workplaces going, okay, well, we'll leave that to you now. You can help and you can be the answer to our mental health issues in the workplace. So, looking at every role and what they need to kind of create this wider organisational impact.
Yeah, no, I think that's really important. Like you say, so essentially this, in terms of bridging the gap, in terms of training more people, getting to that 1 in 10, that doesn't necessarily include the divestment of your portfolio, which will then be tailored to, like you say, people within an organisation in specific roles that have an impact on cultural change.
Yes, 100%. I think it's important to recognise why we have a goal of 1 in 10. So when Mental Health First Aid first started as an organisation and was set up as a social enterprise, the idea was from the Malcolm Gladwell book, The Tipping Point. So the idea was actually if you can get 1 in 10 people to change their behaviour, you create a tipping point for societal or culture change. So from a mental health first aid perspective, we were always kind of like, actually, if you can train 1 in 10 people within the population to open up and start conversations around mental health, you create that tipping point in society where it starts to reduce the stigma and more people talk about it, are open to it, and it just becomes the norm. And that was kind of our starting point, really.
Yeah, well, that's it's definitely going on my list.
Yeah, yes, definitely should.
Okay, so I mean, I've got to ask, as a CEO of an organization that is dedicated to mental health in the workplace, how do you practice self-care?
Oh, I'm always learning, if I'm honest. I think we're always learning, aren't we, about what works for us and what doesn't. There's a couple of key threads though. So the things that work for me, definitely comedy and laughter. So I have if I'm ever kind of struggling or I know that I'm coming up to a busy period in my life, I have to pre-plan comedy in, whether that's watching comedy on TV, whether that's going and seeing a comedian. So comedy and laughter is a very important part.
Who was the last comedian that you went to go and see?
It's a really good point.
Oh,
Let
now
me
that you
think
say
about
it,
this because
yeah.
I probably haven't been out to watch it for a while. I've probably watched more of it at home. I think probably Mickey Flanagan actually was probably the most recent one, but that was probably about 2 years ago. But I definitely need to go and watch more of it. I told you I'm still learning, and I still have to remind myself what I need to do for my self-care. But comedy is a big moment. I also find that having things planned in, so those moments of joy, those things to look forward to. So like I'm always trying to go, okay, what are the next 2 or 3 things that I've got planned in, so that I've got a bit of a recharge and a bit of let off a bit of steam, do something fun, connect with friends, family members, having a shared experience, kind of a collective moment of joy. So pre-planning things in. And I think the rest of it really for me is just spending really good quality time with the family, whether it's walking the dogs, whether it's spending time with my youngest, talking about Roblox or FIFA or, some gaming activity, that connectivity is priceless to me as well. So making sure that is built into my working week and my schedule for the week or the fortnight ahead is really important to me as well.
So comedy, meaningful moments, and laughter.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Love it. Thank you. Thinking about MHFA as an organisation, thinking about some of the things that have been happening more recently, there's a campaign you've got live at the moment.
There is. Yeah.
Mandate the change.
Yeah.
Which for the listeners or the viewers that aren't aware, MHFA England is calling for mental health first aid to be mandated in every organisation, just like physical first aid. I guess the question off the back of this one is, as I understand it, and I'm sure we spoke about it previously, it's been tried previously in the UK to amend the physical first aid regulations, I think maybe back in 2019, to include mental health. So as you see it with this new campaign, what's different this time?
Couple of things. So in 2019, there was a 10-minute bill put before Parliament, which got to second reading. We ran out of time. There was a general election looming. The world was changing. There was a pandemic was coming. All sorts of different things. Actually, the government ran out of time. The backing was immense. There were a significant amount of MPs that backed the call for mandating it, but we just ran out of time. So effectively, we're now in a world where we're post-pandemic. We've got a different government. We've got a different set of MPs around the table. And actually, I think, that means you have to go again in terms of getting people to understand the impacts and, the benefits in the workplace, the benefits to individuals, the benefits to the health service, the benefits to the economy. So we're working our way through that at the moment. I think the landscape, though, is much more open to this at the moment than it perhaps was back in 2019. So post-pandemic, so many more people talk about mental health more openly now because they've had so many different individual and unique experiences of their own mental health during that time.
Sure.
That I think that means people are more open to the conversation from a general public perspective. We've also seen a real shift in the government's understanding of the impact around things like workplace mental health or suicide prevention in the workplace. So if you look at this year in particular, we've had the British Standards Institute introduce workplace suicide prevention standards that have just been launched, and we've been really pleased to be involved in shaping those standards and launching those standards. So again, lots of organisations are talking about that, looking at the impact of that, why it's so important for workplaces to have plans in place around suicide prevention. We've also had the Mayfield Keep Britain Working review as well, where actually the government have recognised that the workplace plays such a unique role in people's mental health, but also in terms of the economic impact of mental ill health as well.
Sure.
So whether it's looking at ways to retain people in work so that they don't fall out of work because they don't necessarily get the right levels of support for their mental health, or whether it's about getting people who want to work back into employment through getting jobs with organisations who are good at supporting mental ill health. They've just recognised as actually it's there's not just an individual benefit, there's a benefit to the health service, there's a benefit to the economy.
Yeah.
And I think that's great. So people are looking at this with a much bigger lens and a much more strategic lens now, which means that they're more open to the conversations around this because they can see the impact that it can have in lots of different places, not just at an individual level.
I can't remember a time previously where there's been so much information dedicated to kind of highlighting the impact of mental ill health in the workplace. There was something from the Centre for Mental Health at the top end of last year. Samaritans has released, there was a report, and it was in conjunction with the London School of Economics about the cost of suicide to the economy. There's the British Standards report you just mentioned, and then most recently the review from Sir Charlie Mayfair, which I've got a few questions about actually. But before I get to that, just thinking about this Mandate the Change campaign, something else that came out of it was that you've released a draft set of workplace standards for mental health first aid to really highlight and showcase what good looks like for organisations that are considering or in the process of training their people with mental health first aid. So can you take us inside the moment where you realised as an organisation that actually there was a need for a kind of a set of standards for this?
There's always been a need for a set of standards. And I think the thing that's different now is when we first started out, we had that one-on-one relationship with workplace leaders to be able to say, great, you're going to have some employees who become mental health first aiders. Here's what you need to think about. So kind of for the last 18 years, we've always guided people through that process and given them our kind of wisdom, shared the best practice from our work with over 20,000 organisations so that they can really think about how they're going to introduce it, how they're going to embed it, how they're going to make sure their mental health first aiders are supported, how are they going to get the most impact and effectiveness for the wider colleagues in that workplace. That's always been the case. I think the two things that have shifted is one, a form of flattery. There are a lot of providers who have created versions of mental health first aid training. And so what we are seeing is lots of workplaces are training their staff as mental health first aiders, but some of those providers don't necessarily have the rigour and the same level of support that we would provide to workplaces. So one of the things, if someone contacts us and says, I want to train somebody, unless they're willing to sit back first and think about how they're going to launch it, how they're going to support people, we'll say, look, until you've thought about that, don't do the training.
Right.
You need to think about it and have a plan for how you're going to deliver this,
Sure,
for it to be as effective as it can be, and a supportive experience for the people that go on that training. So that's the first thing to say. I think the second thing to say is, we're constantly talking to workplace leaders all of the time about the impact that they are having and the learnings that they are having. So about 4 years ago, organisations said to us, actually, we're doing really well with mental health first aid and we've put lots of support in place, but we'd like to go further. What else can we do? So we're starting to see workplaces really want to go further with everything and stretch themselves and really deliver best practice. So it was the right time to refresh our guidance and to be a bit more formal, to say, actually, there should be a set of public standards for every workplace that's thinking about putting mental health first aid in place. And that will make sure that it's as impactful and effective as it can be. And it really helps those mental health first aiders to thrive, and people just get the most out of having mental health first aiders in place rather than training a group of people and leaving them to it, and it not being a great experience for them as a result, and it's not really being impactful for the organisation as a result either.
And so the standards, from what I've read, cover a range of areas. That's things like governance, protected time, safe spaces, the escalation process, and requirements around continuous professional development. As you see it, which parts of those standards do you think will make the biggest difference for employers?
That's a really interesting question, because all of the standards
They're
are
there for a
there
reason,
because
right?
they're so important.
Sure.
I think the thing that we tend to hear from mental health first aiders the most is that they don't have the right infrastructure to be effective. So those mental health first aiders that have gone on a course, come back, their organisation might say, oh, here are your mental health first aiders, go and talk to them if you want to. But quite often mental health first aiders will go, unless we're visible and people know who we are, unless people know what mental health first aid is and also what it isn't, and how to access us, it's not effective. But also when people start to practice mental health first aid, they often describe it as trying to learn a bike and they've still got their stabilisers on. It takes them a couple of months to get their confidence up and a few conversations. And so having a workplace that's really thought through the different scenarios that they might come up against, the trickier ones, so a suicide crisis, for example, or confidentiality. When is it okay to break confidentiality, and how do I tell people that there might be a point where I need to break it, or some of the conversation will remain confidential? What happens if I'm struggling with my own mental health and actually don't feel able to give my best to being a mental health first aider at the moment? You know, is it okay if I step back? What's the process? There were lots of questions I think that mental health first aiders were asking their workplaces who didn't quite know the answer if they hadn't already planned in a proactive way what the infrastructure was. And I think the standards, it's hard, there's no one standard that jumps out at me, but it's the full infrastructure to really support those mental health first aiders, help them to thrive, help them to be as effective and impactful as possible, so that the people that they support get the best experience from them. Because at the end of the day, the conversation is about the people that the mental health first aiders have those conversations and provide that support to.
Sure. You mentioned infrastructure.
Yes.
Now that's interesting because the CIPD's Health and Wellbeing at Work report from September this year says that only 29% of organisations train their managers to support mental health in the workplace. So what's your message to organisations who support mental health first aid training in principle, but don't yet have the infrastructure to embed it?
Infrastructure is an interesting word, isn't it? I think if organisations want to think about having mental health first aid in place, I think they have to experience it. If you're a leader in an organisation and you're thinking, okay, I think we should have mental health first aid, you need to go onto the training first and experience it and understand the role, understand what the training is, and then come back and proactively think about, okay, how's this going to work in my sector, my own organisation, the unique culture that we have, the work that we do, the shift patterns, the geographical locations. Are we remote working? Are we in a physical space delivering what we do? You've got to come back and think about all the different aspects. How do we embed this into all the different policies? What role does mental health first aid play in our wider strategy, policies and approach to it, supporting employee mental health? So I think you have to have someone that experiences it and comes back and does that thinking. Once you've done that thinking, you're ready, and you're ready to think about having a wider group of people experience it and put those plans into place. The thinking doesn't cost money. It takes time, but it doesn't have a physical outlay. It doesn't cost an organisation to do that, but someone has to experience it and do that thinking in order to make it work and be effective.
So thinking strategically about and also working from a place of understanding.
Yeah. 100%. I think if somebody tries to implement this in their workplace and they haven't experienced it, it won't be as effective as it could be.
Yeah, there'll be that disconnect, let's say.
Yeah, you touched on something else that I think is really important as well. So you talked about the 29% of managers that are trained in employee mental health.
Yes.
If you heard me talk in any other spaces, my favourite statistic that I keep trotting out from last year was the one from the Workforce Institute that basically said that a manager has more of an influence on your mental health than your doctor or your therapist, and equal to that of your partner. And if you just think about that for a moment, if you think about your experience of work over however many years, a long time for me, but if you think about your experience of work, if you think about the pivotal role that different managers have played in your good and your bad experiences of the workplace, but also the impact that they've had on your mental health or your well-being, it's bizarre to think that only 29% of managers have got the right skills in being able to understand mental health, have supportive conversations and support people's well-being. If you think about it in the context of the Keep Britain Working Review, that's not just mental health, that's also physical health and disability. Like, managers have the fundamental ability to make or break somebody's experience of work and the support that they receive around their health and health prevention. And I think some businesses and organisations really have got that and have got the memo and are doing great things around it. But there's a significant number of employers that have not quite worked out that actually, if they invest in their managers and give them the right skills, knowledge and training, that could be the one fundamental game changer for them.
Yeah, no, that's pivotal with a capital P. I mean, you said more influence than a doctor or therapist and equivocal to a partner.
Yes.
And it just highlights, makes, I guess, unfortunately causes even maybe a bit more cause for concern with that 29% figure.
Yes.
Okay, so in your experience then, let's think about, the barriers to, rolling out training in the workplace. Outside of cost, what tends to be the main barrier when employers are presented with a business case for mental health first aid?
I think it's probably time. I think people are not quite sure how much time it's going to take. to get the training, to do the training, but also to kind of for people to do the role. So one of the interesting things about physical first aid and mental health first aid differences, for example, is if you look at physical first aid, on average, a physical first aider will use their skills once a year. A mental health first aider will use their skills between 2 to 3 times a week on average. And so it's quite difficult, I think, for a business to go, well, actually, how many conversations are mental health first aiders going to have, and how much time do they need to provide the support? But I think one of the common myths actually that tends to happen is there's an assumption that if you've got mental health first aiders and you've got a list of people on a wall, that everyone picks the phone up or does an email or knocks on a door and says, can I come and talk to you? Actually, over 90% of mental health first aid conversations don't happen that way. They actually happen in the moment, in natural conversations. They're not set pieces.
Right.
They are, oh, hello, something's not quite right here. I know how to open up a conversation. I'm going to have a conversation. And actually, quite often, people might not necessarily even realise they've reared into their mental health first aider role until they start to get into applying, the LG discussion framework that's a fundamental part of the training. So there is a little bit about employers kind of understanding just actually how many conversations our mental health first aiders going to have, and how much time is that, and are they going to have enough time? And I think that gives a dilemma of how many mental health first aiders do I need in a workplace sometimes. So we do have some organisations who train every single manager because actually they're natural conversations that are happening on an ongoing basis, which means you're more able to apply your skills in everyday conversation rather than this expectation of someone knocking on the door or saying, I want to talk to a mental health first aider, which just isn't actually how things happen in reality.
Yeah, no, I have definitely heard that sentiment before, expressed a little bit differently, but along the lines of people maybe feeling like they're going to be opening up a tin of worms by kind of saying, hey, here's the wall of people, this is who you talk to. But like you say, the conversations happen a bit more intuitively than that.
Yes.
And that's one thing that I take from it myself, and something that I talk to people that I train as well is, you described or likened it to kind of, learning to drive a car or riding a bike. At first, you've got your stabilizers on and you're thinking mirror signal maneuver, but actually after a while, you'll just find it just naturally changes the way that you communicate and listen as well. So you mentioned the review, Mayfield review. And I guess really this brings us to the national landscape when it comes to mental health in the workplace. So the Keep Britain Working Review, led by Sir Charlie Mayfield, argues that employers are uniquely placed to shift to a prevention-focused approach and keep people connected to work. And there were a number of kind of key findings from the review. If we just think about the executive summary, I'm not going to list off all of the numbers, but these were some of the headline figures. It says that over 1 in 5 working age people in Britain are now out of work. That's higher than many of our competitor countries, such as the Netherlands, Sweden, and Denmark. That's they're sitting between sort of 15 and 18%. We have 800,000 people out of work. More people out of work now than in 2019 due to health problems. And with current trends, we're projected to add another 600,000 to that figure by 2030. It's not far away. And it says that the UK now loses around £212 billion every year due to economic inactivity linked to ill health, which is the equivalent of 7% of GDP and nearly 70% of income tax that we pay through lost output, increased welfare payments, and additional burdens on the NHS. So it was a mouthful. But firstly, thoughts on those figures?
So it's great that those figures exist because I think they've created a bit of a catalyst in the conversations that are happening amongst people that wouldn't probably ordinarily have a conversation around workplace mental health. However, I dislike figures like this because they disregard the individual people and the personal stories of the impact that happens for individuals at a local level. So it's great that we've got this evidence and these statistics, and it's great that the government have piqued their interest in, oh, hello, there's lots of benefits of focusing on this. But it also makes me sad that actually there have always been benefits to individuals, to teams, to workplaces around this, and it's taken kind of, talking about GDP and reducing the benefits bill to get this as a wider conversation. So whilst they're great, and I really encourage the review and the fact that we've got this evidence and this statistics and people are now starting to think about what action they can take, I also find it quite saddening that it's taken this to prick up more ears than I would have liked. This should have been a conversation that we had a long time ago.
Yeah.
I think that's my first reaction to the statistics.
Okay.
Secondly, though, great opportunity to engage with stakeholders who would ordinarily just wouldn't have these conversations. So I do think it opens the door at a national level. And if this is what it takes to make that happen, you know, we're taking this opportunity. Like if we can make a difference to people's lives at work, you know, their health outcomes, preventing suicide, brilliant. Bring it on. Let's use these stats. Let's have more conversations.
So we're talking about, you know, employers being uniquely placed to shift from from a prevention-focused approach, to a prevention-focused approach. As you see it, you know, how does mental health first aid fit into this shift from a reactive to a preventative model?
I mean, mental health first aid has been designed to be an early intervention tool. I think when we think about mental health first aid, it's easy to think that it's when, you know, it's a supportive thing when somebody's in crisis, which it is, but actually it's been designed to be an early intervention tool. So the idea is to open up a conversation with someone that you're worried about, you know, asking them if they're okay, and having this conversation gets them to think about what's going on for themselves, think about the issues that are happening for themselves. And we know that these interventions, the earlier that you can signpost somebody into the right support for them, that actually the faster, more successful their recovery will be. And therefore, you know, the less likely that people are going to get to crisis points than perhaps they would be if they don't talk about this and they don't get signposted into the right support early. So it's a huge early intervention tool that I think, you know, again, from a workplace perspective, if you're an adult and you work full time, you spend 2/3 of your awake life at work, which is a huge amount of time.
It's scary when you put it like that.
So if you think about the people that are probably uniquely placed to spot if things are not quite right with you, you probably spend more time with your work colleagues than you might do with some of your family members. And so having an early intervention tool in the workplace where people might spot these signs and open up these conversations early, that's amazing for public health. Like, how good is that? Like, if you're in that space a hell of a long time and you've got people there who can support you and get you signposted to where you need to get to, brilliant. I think the thing for me is, you know, Keep Britain Working Review, great, all about employment, keeping people in work, getting people in work. But I think one of the things that we often underestimate is the ripple effects of mental health first aid training. So if I get trained in the workplace and I learn these knowledge and skills, you know, look at my own personal experience of going onto the course. Those skills meant I could go home and immediately use them with a friend or family member, or I could use them in my local community or in my local neighbourhood. So it's actually a community health intervention as well. And I think we forget that ripple effect of, if you can reach more people with this training in the workplace setting, it doesn't just benefit the workplace, it benefits your local community and wider society, and therefore overall it's a health prevention tool.
The idea of community is featured quite a lot this year for several of our awareness days. And just coming back, in fact, just something you said at the top of this kind of segment about, again, maybe just not quite a sour, I'm saying this, you didn't say this, but like a sour taste in your mouth around maybe the numbers per se. And it takes me back to a previous conversation with Chris Cummings, and he said something to the effect of, you know, if by focusing on the numbers we lose sight of the human story, then ultimately it means that we've got a hole in our bucket when it comes to mental health strategy.
I agree, and I think one of the things that I think we're uniquely placed to do is we've got 800,000 mental health first aiders that we've trained. They talk to us all of the time about the stories of how they've helped people. They talk about how many conversations they're having, where people are getting signposted to, the typical trends in the types of conversations that they're having. And we're in a really good place to be able to share that. So one of the things that we're going to be doing with the Keep Britain Working Review is, one of the recommendations is to create a data centre where workplaces will feed all of their data and the impact of health interventions in, so they can really work out from an evidence base what's really working and making a difference, and that will inform future government strategy. So we've already signed up and are committed to sharing top line information around the impact of mental health first aid and those trends, those themes and those outcomes, but also those real life stories as well, because we have to bring it back to the human aspect of things, as you've just described. We can't lose sight of that. It can't just all be about numbers and, you know, numerical, monetary. It's got to be about, this is saving lives and changing lives, and we cannot lose sight of that.
How long is that project going to be going on for, with the data center and kind of feeding in top line information, and also how many other organisations are involved?
So in the Mayfield report, he talks about this vanguard of workplaces who are signing up as kind of early adopters and supporters of the recommendations. He's working with the Department for Work and Pensions to set up the data centre, so it will take a couple of months to get it set up. But I think it's a longitudinal study, so it's likely to be there for some years to be able to get that long-term evidence base as well,
Sure.
with a view to informing future government policy and spend, and hopefully providing more incentives for workplaces to go above and beyond with some of the practices that they put in place as well.
What a time to be involved.
Yeah, definitely.
And so I was going to follow up then, because you mentioned about, the community of mental health first aiders, 800,000 of them, talking to you all of the time. You also spoke about, reach and impact, and how the training in the workplace actually has that ripple effect, back into the community. So just thinking about the work that, mental health first aiders do at work, at home, wherever they find themselves, frankly, thinking about, visibility, recognition, and community. 1.1 million people trained across 20,000 workplaces since 2007. And we are now sitting here on the eve of the inaugural Mental Health First Aider Day, MHFAider Day. So alongside this, you've worked with the Association of MHFAiders on a report called the MHFAider Effect, which draws on insights from over 4,000 MHFAiders. Summarising their experiences to date, where they use their skills, and the issues they're most likely to support people with. So thinking about the MHFAider Day, what does it represent for you personally and also the wider community?
It's so exciting. I can't tell you, honestly. We've been talking about this for about 2 years now. So we set the association up just over 18 months ago. And the idea was, we've got this amazing group of people who practice mental health first aid skills every day and support people every day. And so creating a kind of a home, a huge peer community of support for them, and giving them a national voice to kind of feed into what does great workplace mental health look like, and what more should workplaces be doing. That's been super important to us, and we've come really, really far with that. So to get to this point now, to go, right, this is our first national day to celebrate the people that perform those roles and have those life-changing and life-saving conversations, but also to help raise their visibility, to give the opportunity for their workplaces to say thank you and to shout about the impact that they have within the workplace. It's phenomenal. And we've had so many people who are getting involved, social media's lit up with fantastic posts from workplaces celebrating the impact that their mental health first aiders have had. Mental health first aiders talking about, stories of how they've helped people who've been supported by mental health first aiders, talking about how they have been supported and how it's changed their life. It's just been brilliant. We've had such an amazing response, and I'm so excited to see how everything goes tomorrow, and to make this an annual event that just keeps shouting about the brilliant work that mental health first aiders do.
Which was the trend that you found most interesting out of all of this data?
I think the most interesting thing is the number of conversations that are happening
Sure.
on a regular basis.
Just the sheer volume we're talking
The sheer volume, and when you compare that to physical first aid, for example, average conversation, one per year on average, one intervention, it's phenomenal. I think it really brings to life just how impactful this is. This isn't a training course you go on and then you support someone once a year. This is a training course you go on and you're having conversations 2 to 3 times a week, both in work and out in your local communities or at home. And how amazing is that?
So with mental health first aiders, obviously they, support people with a range of scenarios, whether that's suicidal crisis, bereavement, financial strain. And what I've found is that through that unique blend of both observed and lived experience, MHFAiders often have some really powerful stories. Is there a particular moment or an MHFAider story that stays with you?
I don't think there's one particular story. I love hearing the stories because every single one is unique, and every set of circumstances is different.
Sure.
I think there are some common themes that we hear of that it always reminds me, oh my God, this is amazing. So, when you hear about parents or carers who've gone home and had really life-changing conversations with their children, for example, that ultimately the younger you can support somebody with their mental health, the better their mental health is going to be in the future. So, when parents talk to me and carers talk to me about how brilliant the training has been for them to have that conversation with their own children. I also quite like, when I go and talk to the emergency services, for example, quite often talk to paramedics, for example, who say, this training course has given me more skills around how to support a patient with mental health issues or who's in crisis than my paramedic degree did. I'd like go, yeah, okay, actually, you can start to see the powerful impact that some of this has on a day-to-day basis that sometimes you don't necessarily, it's not front of mind, I guess. So it's stories like that where I hear about certain audiences, certain groups of people who are having conversations that you just wouldn't think that mental health, you'd think that a paramedic would be having these skills already and would be able to support somebody, but actually no, that's not the case, and we're making a real difference by training emergency services in doing their role even better with more confidence and more skill to support patients.
Yeah, I guess just on reflection, overwhelmed and also grateful when I do hear some of these stories, like some of the ones that you've mentioned. One that I can think of is a company that I've worked with for some years now, and did some mental health first aid training. Came back, a year later on to do another talk, and somebody approached me and said, basically off the back of the training that we did together, actually I noticed the difference and in a colleague, and was confident enough to then actually ask the question, and it turns out that person was on the verge of a suicidal crisis. And off the back of that, they were then able to kind of talk to key members of that person's support outside of the workplace, and the person attributed the confidence, the know-how, the skill, the mindset to be able to kind of spot the differences and do that just based on mental health first aid training. And like I say, I just not disbelief, because I wouldn't be doing it unless I believed in the training, but just sort of super overwhelmed, but also grateful as well that that's the impact that this training has. Yeah, stories like that.
Yeah, I also find as well, have conversations. We quite often talk to like farmers and vets, for example, quite male-dominated industries who ordinarily don't feel that it's the norm to talk about mental health. And when we typically train with some of them, they actually find that amazing. Like they really, really get a lot out of that, and being able to go and talk to people who just have even more barriers and more stigma around talking about their mental health and being open around their mental health. We hear quite a lot of stories, particularly around men's mental health, where it was super powerful, and those conversations just wouldn't happen, just would not happen in some of those sectors or spaces at all. So I think it's stuff like that makes me think, yeah, we've shifted a culture in a set of people that is going to be a game changer for them, and that's really important for me.
Yeah, that makes me think. I think the book is Originals, and it's just something that sticks. It talks about what it means to think originally, like some of the people that have changed, influenced the paradigm shift over time. And one of the threads, I forget which chapter it's in, but essentially it's saying, hey, if you want to know how to kind of improve yourself, you speak to somebody that doesn't like you. Right? Yeah. Where I'm going with that. Okay, so in terms of the impact, you've had a really big impact if you can reach somebody, in the case of, let's say, farmers or vets that are typically formed of a population that either has some kind of stigma or barriers to these kind of conversations. You're making an impact, and a good one if they're opening up and joining the conversation, let's say.
There's some of the things that I've realised is, they always kind of say, take the conversations to the people rather than wait for the people to, seek the support.
Sure.
So a couple of years ago, we did a huge amount of work with hairdressers and barbers. And I was like, of course, these are people that are uniquely placed in local communities.
Massive. Yeah.
To be having conversations every day about what's going on in your life and, the ups and downs of life. And actually, by giving hairdressers and barbers mental health skills and mental health first aid skills, there's so many conversations that we are noticing that are now happening for people that are in those professions. It's brilliant, but it's thinking about where are there people that are uniquely placed to talk to lots of people in the community that would really benefit from having these extra skills and being able to have more of these conversations. So that quite fascinates me as well. Like, where can we go and utilise people that are already having amazing conversations with huge numbers of people, if we give them those extra skills? Another level.
Yeah, really powerful. Okay, so sounds like the association is playing quite a central role in this movement, in the future of this movement. And also the voice of the MHFAiders as well, as per this report. So how kind of central would you say the voice of MHFAiders is when it comes to shaping policy going forward?
It's crucial. If you think about mental health first aiders, they're the ones on the ground having the conversations. So they know what people are experiencing, the typical types of causes of some of the mental health conversations and issues that people are having. They can also see what's going wrong in workplaces as well. So one of the things that I think is a bit of an untapped potential that we're really working with workplace leaders on at the moment is, make sure you tap into this network, like the insights and the information that they've got about what's really going on for people and how the employer could play much more proactive role in the support of people. And a lot of those conversations, will be about issues that are caused by the workplace as well. So if you think about that, they're such an asset to an employer to be able to say, actually, talk to us about some of the themes and trends that you're seeing and some of the conversations you're having. Well, actually, there's quite a few line manager relationship issues and conflict issues, or actually, sick pay isn't good enough and people are really stressed about it and it's causing presenteeism, and actually some people will be better off taking some time out, but they won't. Those are kind of rich insights that actually workplaces could really get if they really utilise their mental health first aider network to help them understand what's going on, to help them co-design policies and processes. And at a national level, that's the role we're trying to play with those mental health first aiders in the association, is let's represent the national picture, let's hear what's going on, tell us what you think, give us your ideas, and we'll help to influence employers at a national level on your behalf. And we're getting some great insights and some great interactions and engagement with it, which has been brilliant.
Yeah, you can see already the potential for like a really kind of almost a two-way conversation, but a positive feedback loop there. Workplaces are tapping into the MHFAider network, the MHFAiders in the workplace, and are talking to the association, and then the results from the association then informs how the products and the training and how that gets how that evolves over time, and that feeds back into the workplace, and it all goes. Yeah, I can see that.
It also gives us, if you think about the fact that we've been heavily involved in the Charlie Mayfield Keep Britain Working Review, we've been involved in the British Standards Institute suicide prevention, in the workplace standards, we've been able to use our insights from the voice of those mental health first aiders and play that in at a national level. So it's a huge audience, with real insights of real life examples that we're amplifying their voice. And that's been fantastic, because without that insight and without talking to that community on a regular basis to understand what's really going on, we could have a seat at the table, and we could, based on our training and the knowledge that we've used to create our training, we could have a say. But it's much richer and much more insightful from all of those real life examples that are happening on the ground.
So in terms of the central role that this association plays, and why MHFAiders should be a part of it, it's not just kind of sharing best practice and kind of connecting with others, which of course is important. It's an opportunity to join the conversation nationally about
Definitely
mental health skills, support, and training in the workplace.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay. Good. And then I guess just going forward, what are your kind of hopes or aspirations for? You mentioned, ideally that it can become a kind of a national day, an annual thing. But further to that, what are your kind of hopes or aspirations around what MHFAider Day can become years from now?
I mean, it will always be a huge thank you. That's first and foremost, I think, to celebrate the impact that people have who volunteer their time and put efforts into helping others is first and foremost the most important thing for me. I think secondly, the most important thing after that would be the workplaces recognising their impact and promoting visibility. We talked before about there's no point having a network of trained mental health first aiders if nobody knows who they are and how to approach them and have a conversation with them.
Sure.
So I do think that visibility, that recognition, that's the platform we want to continue. There's loads of other opportunities, I think, in the future for different awareness raising. I think there are more ideas than we can probably cope with. And again, the beautiful thing about that is we'll use that network and that community to inform the shape of what that day should be in the future. So it's not just about us saying what is that day about. It's about the mental health first aiders saying, we've got a platform on a regular basis. What do you want to include in it this year? What's important to you? And supporting them to champion, amplify their voice, get them heard, and champion what they do.
And then thinking about the bigger picture, what gives you hope when you look at the direction of workplace mental health in the UK at the moment?
sheer volume of conversations that are happening in every corner of everything, government, employers, sector, trade bodies, trade unions, they're all talking about it. And a few years ago, people weren't talking about it as much. So I think the desire, the will, the passion is there. The data and evidence is starting to come through. And I think, the government's economic case, I think, gives you a slightly different platform to layer all those things on top of and just make it a much more powerful and influential conversation that will create meaningful change.
And so if every listener or every viewer could make one change or take one action to improve mental health in their workplace, what would you want that to be?
I mean, of course, I'm going to say they should all become mental health first aiders, because it will give them skills to support themselves, their colleagues in their workplaces, their friends, family, community members. But if I'm honest, aside from that, there's something for me about connection. And I think we've lost it a little bit over the last few years, whether that's the pandemic, there's probably 100 reasons, pandemic, remote working, there's loads of different reasons why we are just not as united and not as connected as we all were, could be, or should be in the world. And there's something for me about the more moments of connection you can create, the more conversations are going to happen about how other people are, the more empathy that there is that's going to exist, the more likely you might be able to spot if somebody's not doing okay, and the more likely you're probably going to ask them if they're okay and open up a conversation that could really, really change their life. So there's just something about connecting as much as you can, friends, families, neighbours, your colleagues in your workplace. Like, we've got to get better at doing more connection and finding more ways to connect in with people. And there's loads of benefits to that, but mental health is one huge part of that benefit.
Amazing. So thinking more proactively about how we can create those more small moments of connection in and outside the workplace.
Yes.
Sounds good. Sarah, it's been an absolute pleasure catching up. Thank you for joining the show.
Thank you. It's been really enjoyable.
This has been Wellbeing Talk with myself, Matt Balfour, your guide to more accessible conversations about mental health in the workplace. Be sure to subscribe to the Let's Go Wellbeing YouTube channel, and we'll connect on the next episode.